Welcome, my dude. This is Cause Agent Coda speaking, and welcome to part 5 of 9 videos showing you the differences between the Atari ST and the Amiga versions of The Simpsons, Bart versus the Space Mutants. The reason why I'm showing you the differences between the Atari ST and the Amiga is because the Atari ST is pretty much the Amiga clone. Everything you're about to see is basically the exact same thing. So, if you're interested in seeing the major differences between the NES and the Atari ST, just go watch the NES versus Amiga for more detailed information, because that's, again, pretty much the exact same thing. You'll see as soon as we start the video. This video will only point out the slight changes between the Amiga and the Atari ST, so I really do hope you enjoy, and here we go. So Atari ST does not have an intro cutscene, so instead of showing you that with the Amiga, I'm just going to go ahead and skip that entirely. I will be skipping certain sections that the other one doesn't have, just for the sake of trying to go fast. And your number one up or life or whatever you want to call it is basically your last one, so it's the same thing as the Amiga. Just take note that the Atari ST runs at half the speed that the Amiga one does, so it was really hard to sync everything together. So some sections I had to speed up and slow down, whether if it was Atari or the Amiga, just to be able to keep everything in sync. But I tried putting everything together. So as you can tell, the opening cutscene, it does not have the moving conveyor belt at all. When we start and you look at when I use the X-ray glasses, the Amiga turns everything black, like black shadow, versus the Atari where it just turns everything into just darker color. As you can tell, the payphone is actually different. This one is Isabel, last name Ringing, versus a dope. I am a dope. This is Isabel Ringing. Obviously, both modes come out at the very end. That's always nice to see. And there you can tell already how slow it is. So if you pay attention, everything around that isn't the human is the exact same color as the X-ray versus the Amiga, where it just turns everything black. There is no 4 p.m. or 2 p.m. kid, so that's why I just skipped that entirely. And when it comes to checkpoints and everything else, like when it comes to graphics and enemies and enemy locations, item locations, coins, everything is exactly the same thing. So that's the main reason why I didn't want to compare Atari and NES, because you would have literally just seen the Amiga version and be asking yourself if it's actually a different version that I was making or not. So other than that, there isn't really much to say. Everything is just the exact same thing. So here I'm just showing you that the dialogue's exactly the same. Like, again, some of the things I did skip, some of the things I didn't, just for the sake of trying to get the video to move on. But if you pay attention to Bart and the Amiga versus the Bart and Atari, you can just tell how slow everything is. And there I just sped everything up because of how freakishly slow things are. And you can actually make certain jumps that you wouldn't be able to make in the Amiga just because you have a lot more time to set up, or it's just a lot safer because you're not going as quick. There isn't, again, much to say. I tried showing you all of the differences that I could find versus the Amiga and how the Atari differs. It does not differ very much. It does differ very little, which I will be again pointing out in the next episodes, in the next levels, but so far everything's exactly the same, so I hope you enjoy. I'm definitely playing slow just for the sake of showing you the game. But I mean, can you imagine me actually comparing this one with the NES and not actually being able to tell? Like, as you can tell, the window is smaller. Here, there's another great example. You can actually pick up every single coin that Grandpa Simpson throws because of how slow everything is. There, I missed one, but I mean, you can pick it up. And if you look at the exact same time that Atari does Grandpa versus Amiga, like, Amiga just shoots like a half a second while Atari is just still sitting there. As you can tell, the boss has gray hair in Amiga versus Atari that has completely black hair. So that's some of the things that I don't really know why they changed. Like, they changed very slight things. Like, there's only one checkpoint that's actually different from the Amiga. As well as no wrong warps that you would find in the circuits, but I'll point those out as we go. Entering the mall, everything is the exact same thing. There were coins in trash cans that I didn't quote-unquote find in the Amiga, but I could have easily have just not have found them because the NES already has them, but because I couldn't remember whether the NES had the specific coins or not, I'm not really going to mention them. But there is one trash can in the first floor of the mall that has a coin. There's two trash cans in the second floor that has a coin, and there is one coin in a trash can in the third floor, but I'm not exactly going to point them out, and I don't even know if I showed them, because again, I can't remember if the NES also had them, or if the Amiga didn't have them at all, and the Atari one does. But other than that, you can just go ahead and watch the rest of the mall until we move on to the next floor. The other thing is, I was talking about the windows. You can tell, like, the Amiga one is a lot longer versus the Atari that's a lot flatter, so you can obviously see a lot more in the Amiga versus the Atari. Not really sure why that's a thing, other than I'm assuming the monitor size was different, I guess. I honestly don't know, but the way I was playing the game, that's how it was giving me when it came to the window, where one was bigger and one was thicker and longer and whatnot. But again, if you just pay close attention, you can just tell when how much slower the Atari is. So the very next one, just to quickly mention, the very next video, which would be part 6, will be the MS-DOS, and I don't know if I'll be comparing the MS-DOS with the Amiga or the Atari, just depending on what's there and what isn't. But the MS-DOS actually plays slower than the Atari, so you can only imagine how much slower everything will be if I compare it to the Amiga. But let's say if the MS-DOS relates more to the Atari than it does to the Amiga, then I'll just be comparing it to the Atari, but not NES, regardless of which one it relates to, because again, it'll just be like looking at the exact same thing as you were with NES versus Amiga, and me having to struggle to see and put everything together when it comes to which one to keep trying to keep everything in sync. So there's really no point for me to just go triple the trouble of just trying to put everything together when I can just point it out with one that's already exactly alike. So we're finally on the final floor, which is good. Again, all of the checkpoints are in the exact same spots. There I also show you the invisible wall locations and the obvious glitch that the Atari also has when it comes to not having to pick up any of the goals. As you can also tell, the Atari has slightly more color than the Amiga one does. Not really sure if that was the emulator or if it was the actual PC, but it's there, so I guess I'll just mention that. The other thing is, as you can tell, the gameplay doesn't actually stretch the entire way. Like, as you can tell, a section of margin, a section of where the double HP for Bart would be located, like, the screen does not go towards those, as you can tell with the Amiga. Not really sure why they decided in that, but I mean, it's pretty cool, I guess, right? So, when it comes to the circus actually has the most changes. The most changes when it comes to comparisons. So, as we move on, I also play the roulette for whatever reason. You can use the magnet in order to cheat the game and get a 1-up. What I find funny is the fact that the 1-up doesn't appear until you pass the kid, even though it's supposed to appear before the kid. The balloons still counts towards your goals. There's really no point for that though, since you can skip the goals entirely, and you can run away with the darts apparently, but you don't actually get to keep them. You just get this cool little text. So moving on forward, you can actually go up the ladder. You can tell because the weight thing is down at the bottom. So if you pay attention to the Amiga one, it does not have the weight down at the bottom, and it has this really horrible animation of Bart going up the ladder. Don't really know what's going on with that. It looks like an entire section is missing off of his face, but the cool thing is you do get to win the 3 coins that you would get for the NES, but you don't get the Jebediah head. So if you just look at the NES version of everything that that the NES version has, you'll see that you'll actually win the Jebediah head, but not in the Atari. And when it comes to the Dizzy Door minigame, you can't bypass it at all. You have to solve it. So that's a difference that this level has versus the Amiga. Not only that, but there is also no wrong warp. So if you happen to kill yourself at the top half of Krusty, you won't warp anywhere. You'll just warp right back to the Dizzy Door where you're supposed to be. And when I accidentally got the death in the Amiga where you exit the tent and you got hit by one of the clowns, it would wrong warp you back inside the tent, even though it's not supposed to. Like, that does not work for the Atari. Also, when it comes to going up the ladder, there is no unique bird that you would see in the NES, so again, you would have to pay attention to the NES version just for that alone. When it comes to the Atari, the Ferris wheel actually works. No idea why it works in the Atari but not the Amiga, but I mean, there it is. And there is no 1-up where the Ferris wheel is supposed to be. Like, there's supposed to be a 1-up in the middle or somewhere, but there is no 1-up at all. So I would have liked to have shown you the minor differences versus Atari and the NES, just to show and point out what it has versus other ones, but I didn't really know where to put it, so I just decided not to put it in at all. But pretty much, you would either have to trust me or just look up one video and the other, and you'll be able to see the minor differences that it would have, because I think this is the first one where the Ferris wheel actually works and where you can go up the ladder to win 3 coins, which is pretty neat. As you can tell, Lisa actually looks like Lisa in the Atari versus the Amiga, where she's just sort of squished together. Again, all the checkpoints are in the exact same spot. None of them are moved. For the museum, there is one checkpoint that's moved, which I'll point out once we get there. But there, you can actually go over to the right side, unlike the Amiga, when it comes to the boss for the circus. And as you can tell, I actually ended up killing the boss off screen. No moving conveyor belts again, so even though you know what you need to do, it doesn't have moving conveyor belts. I don't know. So moving on to the museum. Also, when it comes to loading, this one does not have the load disc 1, load disc 2, it's just one game entire. And you can see the yellow bar up at the top right when the game is loading. So, if anything, you would probably want to play a game that you don't have to shove 2 different discs just to be able to finish it. So when it comes to one of the changes in this level, there's no ant or spider down where Bart is in the Atari. There's supposed to be an enemy there, but there just isn't. So again, because the Atari actually ends up playing slower than the Amiga, everything is just so much easier to do. If you pay attention to the monkey here, he's actually a lot bigger than he is for the Amiga. So if you pay attention, you can just see, like, he's pretty much triple the size in the Atari, which is nice. It's just a lot easier target to hit. So moving forward, we fight the plant boss. I call him Seymour. Which is... wait and kill him. Also, as you can slightly pay attention to there, you can actually go ahead of the camera scrolling over to the right after you kill the boss. You'll be able to see it a lot more in the final level in the nuclear plant in action, but you can actually go ahead of the moving scrolling, which is pretty funny. So in this section here, I accidentally found it, but you'll see me stand on the corner in the air, in the background. Like you see the rock formation in the background. I'll end up standing on an invisible platform right as soon as I jump to the left, right there. Don't know what's going on. I'm pretty sure the Amiga did not have that, but I wasn't going to double check either. But just know that when I did jump on that invisible platform, the red platforms down at the bottom that you're supposed to use to jump across did not continue until I stepped on that red platform again, which is weird because it just basically means that instead of that little section just moving because you're there, you actually need to be standing on the section for it to continue going forward. Which is, again, it's just funny because accidentally standing on that invisible platform just makes nothing go forward until you go back down, which is pretty funny. When it comes to this section, as soon as we get past the the onks. There I accidentally killed myself, so I just had to restart back. There you can see 2 enemy cats, and there isn't one only in the Amiga. Not only that, but the cats are smaller. Here is the one checkpoint exception. Every checkpoint in this level in the game is all the same, except for this one checkpoint right here. So as you can pay attention to the Amiga, I'll end up killing myself, and I'll end up starting behind the laser right next to the boss, and in Atari I appear in front of the laser, in front of the boss. So that's the only checkpoint that's actually different in the entire game. So just because of the Atari, because you don't move as fast, you can't just make this giant gap like you can in the Amiga. Not only that, but the lava doesn't move, so it's kind of cool that the color of the lava in the Amiga is actually the same in the Atari by not getting so close to it and seeing it off on the corner. On this boss, the dinosaur boss, you can actually go behind him, as you can see there. But if you actually go in front of the boss, it's not that easy to jump back. So you'll most likely end up dying, so you might not want to do that, but just know that it's easier to jump ahead of the boss. Not only that, but the platform that the boss has in order to jump on his head seems to be way bigger than it is for the Amiga, and there you can tell where I was able to move past the camera trying to go up ahead of Bart after killing the boss. But if you go ahead, the camera just keeps scrolling until it hits Bart in the exact middle. So obviously by waiting would be faster, because the camera just catches up quickly versus having this slowly scroll. You can continue playing the level, but I don't really know how far you can get before nothing happens, or if you can actually just get to the boss if you knew how to get there. But yeah. So when it comes to the nuclear plant, everything is exactly the same. Maggie appears in the exact same spot, which is in door 4 over to the left, and Marge appears in every single floor. So if this is by far the longest level, so imagine the longest level done twice as slow, because of just how slow the Atari is. So there, as you can also tell, I accidentally died, and instead of appearing to the right side where I first started, it actually appeared me on the left side. Again, I was not going to try that on the Amiga, because it just seems like the more I play these games, the more I accidentally find things that are different. And there's really no point on me pointing out, oh, I did this in this version, but I didn't find it before, so I'm mentioning it now. It's like, I'll just end up confusing everyone. So just take the note of that even though every time you die, when it comes to nuclear plant, you're supposed to appear in the last spot that you came in from, but because I accidentally ended up dying and still appearing on the left side versus the spot where I started from, you know, it's just neat. I'll just take that as a unique thing that the Atari has versus the Amiga, without actually having to look up the information, even though it wouldn't take that long for me to do it, but yeah. So there, as you can tell, every time you exit a door, you can the camera actually needs to scroll to Bart. Not really sure why, but it just does. You can actually use that to your advantage, because when the camera is scrolling, you can actually despawn some enemies, which you'll see in a couple of instances where the enemy just won't appear whatsoever. Obviously here for the Atari, you can't pick up this 1-up. So Not really sure why they changed some things and why some other things were just different in general, but for whatever reason, they didn't even bother putting a platform to be able to pick up the 1-up in Elevator 4, but yeah. I also don't know how or even why they managed to get the wrong warp out of the Atari versus the Amiga. I just want to say that most likely the Amiga was released first and then the Atari, or the Atari was released first, but because they didn't bother changing too much code, for whatever reason, one of the codes ended up messing up for the Amiga just because they weren't the exact same OS, and then ended up breaking something. I don't really know. So just to go with the easier answer, I want to say Atari came out second and Amiga came out first, so they actually ended up fixing some of the things that were wrong, and in the process adding more things, taking out more things. Like it's all over the place. Like, again, no conveyor moving in the cutscenes, but there is a Ferris wheel that actually moves and works the way it's supposed to, like it does from the NES. So stupid little details like that actually again drove me to wanting to make these videos, because it's the exact same game, so you would think and it's the exact same developers and whatnot that made all of these games. You would think that they would stay as faithful as they would for the NES or for any of the other ports, but nope. Like, they just had to change some things and add other things to other ones. It's very strange. So instead of me having to look up information as to why they had to add and remove things for different versions, like, there's just no reason for me to. I'll just take it as, oh, you know, Commodore and the Atari just wouldn't be able to handle the exact same code for whatever dumb reason. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty much just BS talk currently, because everything is the exact same thing. Again, checkpoints are the same spot. Items, locations in the same spot. If you happen to die inside of the basement, which you don't even have to enter in these versions, it'll just appear you back in floor 1 instead of inside of the basement, which is pretty neat. So I'm not really sure why they ended up doing that as well, even though it doesn't work like that in some of the other versions, if you've ever seen any of the other versions. But yeah, the next video will be part 6, which will be the MS-DOS. Again, I don't know if I'll be comparing it with the Amiga or the Atari, but either way, it's the exact same thing, exact same clone as the Amiga, so I'll just be pointing out the minor differences and then be playing the game like normal. Hopefully I'll have that video out by next week, if not this week. But things will get more exciting again once I get to the Sega family, I guess you could say, where it's the Sega Genesis, Sega Master System, and Sega Sega Game Gear. Wow, Game Boy. Where those three actually are very similar to each other, but they are different in their own special ways, but they will not look like what you're currently seeing now. So 5 more power rods to go. Amiga is currently going to the final location, and again, just pay attention to the speed, just how blazing fast Amiga goes and how slow the Atari one is. There you can see Bart going ahead of the camera. Camera slowly trying to reach Bart. Like again, all of the jumps are way easier in the Atari just because you just have a lot more time to think and move and whatnot, unlike the Amiga where as soon as you make the jump, you have to commit to it. That being said, the Atari one is not that high of a list for favorites when it comes to me comparing to all of them, just because of how slow it plays. I actually like the Amiga way better than the Atari. But as soon as you see the personal rankings, I'll probably end up making a separate video just explaining every single one in a quick fashion and why they're in the spot that they're at. But I mean, when it comes to the locations of my personal rankings, they don't really differ all that much. The only one that really does differ would be the Commodore 64 because of how stupid, difficult, and broken it was when I was playing it. But yeah, I won't really get into that right now. But finally, they both got the last 4 power rods heading over to Maggie, as I like to say, in door 4, all the way on the left side. See what kind of ending we get, which, spoiler alert, is pretty much the exact same thing as the Amiga. Like, that's pretty much the only thing that really does sadden me, is thus far, the ending has just been the stupid, like, I guess you can call it, like, coin, like, just, oh, Bart wins, yay, he saved, Springfield, versus the NES that actually gives you a final cutscene and shows you that they carved Bart's head next to the mountain. I don't know, I just find that a lot more interesting, mainly because none of other ones thus far have even bothered using it. I have no idea why they couldn't just plastered a picture of that instead of giving us a stupid little picture of Bart with sunglasses. Like, come on, it's just so lame. Like, there's no way the NES was actually a lot better when it came to showing things and telling a story versus all the other versions thus far where yeah, they've all looked neat or cool in their own little way, but at the end of the day, it just had to strip out a lot of what the story content would have been to begin with. But anyways, Atari's finally heading to the end. As you can tell, Amiga has the entire family in the elevator. Atari ST also has the exact same thing, the entire family in the elevator. And then when the actual winning happens any day now, and we get the final say, and still no moving conveyor in case you have not noticed. We must honor our foe. I have an idea, sir. Bart J. Simpson, Intergalactic Space Hero. As you can tell, the image for that is slightly different as well. So there's the personal ranking. Pause and check it out if you're super interested. But again, 4 more to go. MS-DOS, Sega Game Gear, Sega Genesis, and Sega Master System. All the other ones we've already done. Hope you guys have been enjoying. I've been having a ton of fun doing these. Definitely been trying to make them as quick as possible as I can. But almost done. 4 more to go or so. And hope to see you guys for the next one, hopefully coming up next week. With that, peace out.